Radiant Glitch is ridiculously overpowered. I love this character, right? So, picking back up with Radiant Black again, it is Sunday. What this does, this picks up in the aftermath of the last video that we did, and Radiant Glitch was just kind of shown at the very end. Now, the crazy thing about this is, keep in mind, we still don't really know everything that's going on. And so initially, you pick up with Marshall. Now, of course, Nathan is the traditional Radiant Black. We'll talk more about that as we get further into this video. But what ends up happening is when Glitch shows up, this dude immediately tears everybody apart. They get absolutely crushed by this guy. What makes him so dope is that quite literally, Radiant Glitch glitches out, right? So it's one of these things where it's almost impossible to hit this guy, being able to dodge attacks, bob and weave, create like a giant shield for himself. But one of the things this shows is that his powers are largely technology-based. And because they're technology-based, they seem very different from the abilities of the other Radiants, who really kind of have their own individual unique powers. Not only that, it's not simply just having advanced abilities, it's also fighting styles, right? They're like, as this guy moves, he's effortlessly dodging every single one of their attacks, countering every blow, meeting it with another, to the point that nobody can really come out on top. And so Radiant Pink, of course, uses her ability of teleportation to get everybody out of there. And they just end up out in Tokyo. And so initially they're just sort of like, okay, like, what do we do? Like, we kind of have to regroup here. But because of the fact that they don't really know much about each other, they're still kind of learning what happens here, right? And that's why she says things like teleporting, that it's draining, right? I jumped us from Sydney to Chicago and then to Tokyo within the span of 2 minutes. Now, technically, her ability to teleport, just jumping from one spot to the next, isn't necessarily exhausting, but doing it 4 times over, it takes a lot out of her because her powers are still relatively new. Not only that, keep in mind, Radiant Pink and Radiant Yellow, they're the ones that have encountered Glitch, right? They kind of led Glitch directly to Radiant Red and to Marshall, Radiant Black. And so in this moment, one of the things that Yellow says is that if the last 6 jumps are any sign, he'll be on our trail again soon. And a packed city, definitely the worst place to try to deal with this guy. Imagine what happened to your friend, but now on the scale of Tokyo. We have to get out of here. Of course, there is kind of a small little reference, which I think is hilarious, where a couple of these guys are just kind of like, what Sentai is that? And full transparency here, I'm not overly familiar with Japanese culture and Sentai, so as I understand it, I guess it's just their equivalent of Power Rangers, or our Power Rangers are the equivalent of their Sentai. I'm a little confused on that. Somebody clarify it down in the comments. But then you get a little bit of clarification here for the nature of Glitch, right? Where Yellow says he showed up a day ago. No introduction, no name, no pretense, just immediately got to business. I've counted at least 4 primary attack types, plus the glitch out, which makes your molecules feel shifted. It's pretty impressive tech, but that's where Pink is like, we don't necessarily know if it's technology. Honestly, the only thing that we know for sure is that this dude's hella set on killing all of us. And so initially in this kind of moment of reprieve, right, we're talking 30 seconds to a minute, maybe a couple minutes, there's a bit of a discussion, right? You know, Pink and Yellow, how did you guys meet each other? It's like, well, we bonded over really old movies and that kind of thing. The idea that Radiant Red and Marshall have beef with each other, because keep in mind, Nathan was the original Radiant. He basically figured out that Red was basically robbing banks, playing the role of a quote unquote superhero. He goes after Red, a great big huge fight ensues, and he ends up in the hospital. And so Marshall takes up the Radiant mantle in his stead, looking to get revenge for his best friend. But again, you know, this kind of beef does create a bit of a rift and it creates a kind of distraction, but still, in the midst of all of this, Glitch shows up and immediately starts attacking them all. And what ends up happening is that Pink opens portals and they all end up getting sent to different locations. Technically, it's a team up, right? So Pink and Marshall end up in one location and Yellow and Red end up in another. Now for Pink and Marshall, this is what gets nuts. When they teleport, they end up out in like the middle of the universe somewhere. And quite literally, it's a giant spacefaring battle among all these robots. They can breathe in space, which is kind of cool, but they have no clue what to make of what they're experiencing here. And I'll be honest with you guys, man, this is when the comic gets crazy. Because at that point, it's like, look, this is way above our pay grade, man. If we stay here, we are going to die. You need to get us out. And ultimately, Pink ends up teleporting them away. And that's when you switch over to Red and Yellow, because as they look around with where they're at, they end up realizing that number 1, they're seemingly still in Japan at Mount Fuji, and number 2, Glitch is here. And Glitch is completely unconscious. And so it's like, we need to get some answers. We need to figure out what's going on with this guy. Now, you do get this kind of a momentary flashback for Glitch. It's not enough to provide any kind of like an origin story or anything like that. It's simply just enough to say that Glitch was floating out there in some debris, presumably in the aftermath of some kind of battle. Glitch got into one of the ships and then took off and is basically just kind of arrived here ever since. And so when you pick back up with Red and Yellow out here at Mount Fuji, they start to have this interesting conversation, right? Where they say, all your suit's lights are still out. The last few days being any indication, I would have bet that you had something to get yourself clear. But seeing as you're still with us, I've got a feeling you're out over your skis. And that's where Glitch responds, the respectful thing would be to immolate as atonement for your stupidity, sinking with that which you do not understand. What do you hope to accomplish by drawing out your deaths? And that's where Yellow responds, right? He says, whether we came to these radiants by ways that you approve of or not, we do have them. And we deserve to know what we've gotten ourselves into. And that's where Glitch gives this really interesting response. He says, what do you know about what you deserve? You've marked your world. Your species will die. There is much that you deserve. And of course, they ask the most logical question. Who are you? Where did all this come from? And the response of Glitch is ambiguous at best. Do not worry. Soon it will not matter. You will be dead. Thank you for the charge, only for them to find out that what Glitch has been doing is literally charging himself up based on their abilities. He draws power off of them. And so this picks up with Marshall and Radiant Pink showing up here, only to find out there's a great big huge fight going on, right? So of course they jump into this fight and they start getting things going. And so in the middle of this fight, Glitch goes after Radiant Pink and stabs her through the chest with his sword. Now her suit does kick in with a kind of healing ability, or at the very least preventing any loss of blood, but it makes no difference because that in turn leads to Glitch stabbing her a second time, obviously illustrating how much more powerful Glitch is than her. Of course, Red and Yellow step up and Yellow warns her, you guys need to be careful. This guy feeds off all of our power. And so once he starts to realize that he's seemingly overwhelmed, at least momentarily, Glitch activates this massive bomb that goes off and just leaves everybody in this massive state of confusion. But in this moment of reprieve, where they're all trying to figure out what's going on, Glitch starts talking again, and he responds to the idea that he feeds off their power, right? And he says, a reductive understanding as the old ways and the new. You tempt fate. You dance among world enders in the shadow of Armageddon, all the while unknowing of the extent to which you are a mistake, an improbable accident, a doom to your planet. Now, no more running until we fix your mistake. And that's what makes this kind of wonky, is like whenever you're talking about some kind of advanced intelligence operating on some measure of a hive mind, that's when you start getting things like we. So I don't necessarily know that Glitch is an individual struggling with multiple personalities, but the initial impression here is that Glitch is basically a robot. Now I will say, that's not true. That's not actually what's going on. And it's kind of nuts because Glitch literally says, I am 001, marked for death by some crazy symbol, now in the service to the new way, and intends to destroy them. And that's where Marshall says, not a chance. And initially, Marshall intends to attack, only for the gigantic robot hand to reach out of his chest and snatch up Glitch and yank Glitch inside. And at that point, Pink is just like, what just happened? What just happened here? Right? And it's kind of nuts because for the moment, the threat is overcome. But the reality here is that these four folks have just been suddenly thrown into a situation that they cannot possibly fathom. I mean, something to keep in mind here, everything that we've talked about so far has happened in a matter of hours. Right? A matter of hours. That's how much has happened in such a short amount of time. So literally, they don't even know what to make of everything they're experiencing here, let alone the idea of Glitch going after them or what's all going on, because Yellow and Pink have basically just gotten their powers not too far behind Marshall and Radiant Red. So no one knows what's going on. No one knows the full extent of their abilities. They've just been suddenly thrown into this impossible situation. And what's kind of nuts about this is that the beef still remains between Marshall and Red. And at that point, Yellow's like, look, here's the thing, right? You two got problems, you've got baggage, cool, that sucks. It's also a part of life. And now, for you, so is a permanent link to a damn black hole. And in case you didn't hear the gentleman with the swords, there's some far bigger fish out there that may also want us dead. And where Marshall's like, yeah, I mean, we teleported into a robot war, the response of Yellow, I have no idea what that means. But if our world's gonna die, I am not gonna be the reason. So for right now, get over your problems and get over yourself. There are far more important things in this world than the beef that the two of you have with each other. And so a little bit of time passes, right, in the aftermath of this argument, and you end up picking up with Marshall as he's just kind of, working his job, and Red shows up. Right? And when that happens, the two of them kind of have a little bit of a sit down because it's the first time they've actually been able to have a real tried and true conversation. And it's her ability to kind of come forward and say, look, right, this is something that we need to work out. Like, clearly I screwed up by attacking your friend and putting your friend to the hospital, and you've clearly got a grudge, so much so that, like, you want to kill me. And so that's why she says, we got off on the wrong foot. I never should have hit him when he first showed up. I shouldn't have taken his car or his mail. And that's where Marshall's like, I mean, you took his mail? And she's like, it was just for, one of those junk loan offers, whatever. But like, the point is this, right? It gave me his address. It gave me a way to kind of lord information over him, is how she figured out where his family was. If you guys remember that moment in the first video where she said, I'll go after your whole family if you ever come back down on me again. But ultimately she's like, look, I just came here to say I'm sorry, right? That's really what I came here to do. And so Marshall takes her to see Nathan, and it's the first time she actually really sees him. Now, there is a moment where you circle back with a kind of villain named Doppler. We'll actually pick up with that one in the next video, because honestly, it's just a small momentary thing, and there's not really enough to really build on. I feel like it kind of distracts from the video, but what you end up doing is picking up with Marshall when he gets back to the hospital, only to find out that because of Nathan's condition and the fact that he's just not really showing any brain activity, they're gonna take him off life support. He's just kind of been on life support this entire time, that basically he's gonna die. And so in this moment of anger and this moment of panic, because of the fact that Marshall has experienced the robot, the kind of source of the radiant energy, at least that seems to be the case, his whole idea is, well, then maybe I can do the same thing for Nathan. And so what he ends up doing is racing out of this room, right? And the idea is that whenever it is that Marshall is close to death, that he's about to die, it's when he's teleported in to basically speak with this robot. So he literally puts himself in harm's way with the intention of basically getting himself killed. And that's when he's suddenly teleported. He's suddenly yanked away. And he's brought into this whole new area. Now, again, this is where things get kind of wonky, because this is sort of a segment that we don't really know a whole lot about. It's just one of these things where it's only appeared a couple times whenever Marshall and Nathan were bestowed with the power of the Radiant and became Radiant Black. And so the giant robot meets with them and says, hello, Nathan, welcome to existence. And the conversation here is exceedingly important because Marshall asks, where are we? Are we inside the black hole? The black hole, of course, being the object that Marshall or Nathan originally touched that turned them into Radiant Black. But the response to the robot, we are everywhere. Of course, Marshall says that's somehow less specific and more confusing, but whatever. They took Nathan off life support. And the response to the robot, to reach Nathan Burnett, you must reach truth. There is only truth in existence. And again, Marshall asked the question, what is this place? Like, how you call this existence, which way is truth? And the response of the robot, that way. And it says, to attempt this will come at great cost. You will not succeed. And it asks, will you reconsider? You will die. And so as you guys kind of notice in the conversations and the statements made by this robot, it's the concept of duality, right? That I will ask you a question, but I will also give you a definitive answer because only truth exists here. So are you willing to consider what it is that you are willing to do? You will die if you do not. That's kind of how this conversation is unfolding. And so that's where Marshall says, he's my best friend. If there's a chance to save him, I'll go wherever and I'll do whatever. I'll literally hit whatever I have to hit. Do you understand what I'm saying? The response, understood. The path to truth is indirect and fatal. The terrain is treacherous and fatal. Travel the helix. Through existence, you will find truth. If existence does not consume you first. And the question of Marshall, are you not coming here? And the response of the robot, no, I cannot follow beyond this space. Do not despair. You will surely die, but you will not be alone. Remember, Marshall, there is only truth in existence. And so Marshall touches the black hole and is suddenly yanked into another location. And so while at this point in the story, we don't necessarily know what existence is, it's clearly an other dimension, right? It's clearly like a different dimension that he's being transported to. But when he arrives there, Glitch is there, and he just says, "Welcome to existence." Now, a fight initially breaks out between the two, right? Like Marshall just immediately attacks him, thinking Glitch is going to attack him. Glitch overpowers him like that. It's not even close, right? And just says like, "No. Like, I am not here to kill you. I am not here to attack you. You are here to attempt the impossible, to navigate existence and retrieve your friend. I will guide you to truth." But a lot of the statements that he makes here are seemingly ambiguous, because Marshall asks, okay, so you can sync with it and get more dope powers. That's awesome. And even if I was going to die, which obviously I wasn't, now I'm going to make sure that I don't. Just so you never come near this thing. But the response of Glitch here, "I have no interest in sinking, only protecting the radiant. You have no hope in existence." And so the two of them basically follow this kind of spiral pattern that leads them to yet another location known as the Sunless Shore. And Marshall's told, "Keep your wits. There could be all manner of dangers here." And so once he initially starts to kind of pick up a thread, it's like, take stock before we go any further. And seemingly because of the response of Marshall and asking, like, I mean, okay, like, what do we have to do before we go any further? Glitch kind of gets pissed, right? And it's like, look, man, if you don't pay attention, you're going to die, right? Like, keep your wits about you. Right? Just take stock of your surroundings. Be aware of what is going on around you. If you don't, you are going to get killed. And then suddenly out of nowhere, a voice pops up and it says, "Hello, Marshall. Welcome to existence." Now it appears in the form of Nathan, and Marshall immediately rejects this, right? It's like, I know you are not actually Nathan, so like, what tricks do you plan on pulling? And the response is, "I'm not trying to trick you. There is only truth in existence. My hope is that appearing to you this way will help you to listen when I say, you should not do this, Marshall. You are not ready to be here. This will not end well. But if you must continue on this path, I will gladly take you. Just know it will be a one-way trip." And so Marshall responds, "There is only truth in existence," meaning you have to be honest here. Does it lead to Nathan? And the response, yes. And that's all that Marshall cares about. Then take me there. And so what makes this entire realm so crazy, what makes this dimension so wild, is that it's effectively sentient, right? Marshall is walking around in a dimension that can think for itself, and it can respond in any number of ways. But the statement, "There is only truth in existence," is paramount here, because to lie in existence, whether you're lying to yourself or lying to existence, is to be met with death. And so what ends up happening is the two of them jump after being chased by these crazy enemies. And they end up in one of the most insane looking places that I think I've ever seen. Because Marshall asked the question, right, Glitch, I mean, if you can teleport here, why are we not teleporting more? And the response of Glitch, "It takes full energy reserve to overcome the gravity for minimal range." Not only that, because of the fact that he has color on him, right? He's got pink on him, it basically makes him a target. Now it is a little wonky because what ends up happening is that Glitch responds that it's the light of existence. And he says, "Your idiocy forced us here through a domain stripped of all artifice. Your being is a beacon," right? You are quite literally a living being in a place of the unliving. You might as well have giant purple letters over your head that say, "Come and attack me." And that's exactly what happens. Forces seemingly start coming after them. And so Glitch warns him, right? There's no stopping what's happening. Existence will take you. The only way to get past it is to get to truth first. And that's when existence appears to him again and says, "Hello, Marshall. We are learning so much about you, and our light has only started to reflect. Why are you here?" And Marshall's response, "You know why I'm here. I told you why I'm here. I'm here to save my best friend." The response of existence, "You are lying." And Marshall is kind of incredulous, right? He's like, "I'm here risking everything to save Nathan. Why would I be lying?" And the response, "There is only truth in existence, Marshall." And so Marshall goes on the attack, right? He literally attacks the very dimension itself. It's pretty funky, to be honest, right? Just between the artistic renderings and everything, it's nuts. It reminds me of like the old Doctor Strange comics from the 60s. And so in an effort to keep him alive, Glitch teleports Marshall away and says, you need to go find truth and try to find truth as fast as you can, but stay on the path. If you do not, existence will take you. And so as Marshall is walking through this location, he's communicated with yet again, except this time, it doesn't necessarily come in a traditional physical form. It's almost as if reality itself is conversing with him, right? Why are you here? There is only truth in existence. Why are you here? And Marshall, in his frustration, seemingly starts giving the only answers he knows how to give, right? I told you, I don't know any other ways to answer. And the question, why are you afraid of the truth? And he's like, I'm not, right? I am not afraid of truth at all. And so it asks again, why are you here? And Marshall's response, I don't know. I thought I did, but I don't. Do you know why I'm here? And the response, yes. So do you. And the response of Marshall, my best friend is still alive. Wherever you have him, he needs to come back. Please, I just want to save my friend. The question, why? The response, because I care about him, I love him. The statement, stop lying. And that's when Marshall says, I'm not lying at all. And again, the statement's made. There is only truth in existence. And so Marshall actually starts to get to the inside, right? He really starts to get to the truth of why he's actually here, which is really just a reflection of how he sees himself. He says, Nathan deserves this, not me. The question is asked, why? And he says, because he did it. His life has a purpose. He's actually chasing a dream. He moved on. And the question asked, moved on from what? And that's where Marshall says, from his hometown, from his family, from me. And it's asked, you? And Marshall says, and he should have. I'm nothing. I've done nothing. And it's asked, why? And he says, I don't know. I really don't, because I'm not enough, right? I am not enough. And so again, the question's asked, why are you here? And he says, because I hate him, because I hate Nathan. And he's like, no, I don't hate him. I hate what he shows me is possible, what he is and what I'm not. I love Nathan. I hate me, because Nathan is a mirror for everything that Marshall wishes he could be. For every failure, Nathan shows what it means to get out into the world and to do something with yourself. Marshall never did that. So Nathan is a walking, talking reflection of what Marshall considers to be his failure. And that is when truth appears, specifically Nathan. And he says, you might think that's true, but it's not the truth. You are not nothing. And it's kind of cool because this is also Kyle Higgins kind of giving us an indication of what happens when you bond with the Radiant. That when that happens, it kind of backs you up, so to speak, right? Because Nathan continues on and he says, I'm me, but I'm also part of this. And I know things that I don't know, which is pretty crazy. And he's like, I mean, they say we can go back anytime we want to, but he tells them, listen, I've known you your whole life. I know who you are, and you are enough. You're more than enough. And are you kidding me? You've done incredible things. You're on an adventure. Everyone goes on one. Yours is just different than mine. And so where Marshall chimes in and is like, look, like I'm afraid. Right? Like, I'm afraid that I cannot do this. And Nathan tells him you can. And he's like, but I can't. And the response of Nathan, of course you can. I know you can. The response of Marshall, how could you possibly know that? And Nathan simply says, because there is only truth in existence. And this is where the significance of that phrase becomes a reality. If a thing is not true, then a person who is in the form of Nathan, kind of part and parcel to this existential space, cannot speak a lie. Everything he says is inherently true. So when he makes the statement, of course you can, then it means Marshall can. And that's kind of the beauty of the conversation. Very few things are actually impossible in this life. Outside of defying the laws of physics, right? Flight without any method of propulsion or anything like that. Of course, those things are impossible. But there is a lot of reality to the statement. If it is a thing that you can imagine, it is a thing that can be done. If it is a thing that you can imagine within the realm of realistic possibilities, then it is a thing that can be done. The only limitation, especially in this day and age, 2025, are the limitations that you put on yourself, because people defy those limitations all the time. And that's where Marshall says, I was going to offer to trade, to stay behind, me for you. I was going to give my life up for you. And Nathan, of course, responds and is like, yeah, they're sorry. That just would have been too easy. Knowing the truth, that's the first test. Now, you have to do something about it. And he says, something's coming, something big. They didn't know if you were ready, if you could step up, but I always knew. And that's the other part of this, is that by Marshall being willing to come out and just admit the worst parts of himself, those parts that we keep down in those deep, dark holes, right? Those insecurities that we don't want the world to know about. When you can finally accept those, you can be your true, authentic self. And that's where Marshall is, because now there's nothing holding him back. And so with the two of them working together, they both leave existence and take back off into the real world. With that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Kind of a crazy cliffhanger, but it's a phenomenal story. I love the Radiant Black story so far. It's wild and beautiful at the same time. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.